Jessica Radcliffe believed the ocean could be tamed. She had spent her life beside it, teaching others that compassion and discipline could bridge the gap between humans and predators. But in one violent instant, that belief shattered. Her death was not just a personal loss. It became a national warning, forcing Americans to ask a hard question: should wild animals ever be turned into performers for human amusement? The stadium at Ocean Haven was alive with noise. More than 2,000 visitors pressed into the steel and concrete amphitheater. Children waved dripping cones of ice cream. Parents lifted phones high, and the announcer's voice thundered through the loudspeakers. On the platform stood Jessica, waving confidently, smiling at the families who had come to see her work with Malow, a killer whale she had raised like a partner. "Give it up for Jessica and Malow," the announcer roared. But before the cheer could settle, the water erupted. Malow's 12,000-pound frame exploded from below, a black and white blur of muscle and teeth. In a single crushing movement, his jaws locked around Jessica's torso. Gasps turned into silence. For a heartbeat, the crowd thought it might be part of the show. Then the surface broke apart in chaos. Jessica's body thrashed for only seconds before she vanished beneath the foam. A child screamed. Parents pulled their children close as the water began to stain red. Trainers on deck rushed forward, blowing whistles, slapping the water with long poles, hurling buckets of fish and ropes into the pool. Nothing worked. Malow was no longer performing, he was hunting. The crowd's excitement collapsed into hysteria. Some bolted for the exits, others stood frozen, phones still recording. From the control booth, alarms blared across the stadium. Sirens cut through the air. The cheerful music that had filled the arena stopped mid-beat, leaving only the sound of violent thrashing water and panicked voices. "She's not coming up. She's not coming up." What had begun as a family outing had transformed into a public nightmare. As screams echoed, a single question hung above the stadium: how could this happen here in front of everyone? The water still rippling outward across the massive tank. Trainers dragged Jessica's limp body from the pool. Her wetsuit was torn, her skin pale, her chest unmoving. Paramedics dropped to their knees beside her, pounding her chest in frantic rhythm as thousands watched in frozen silence. For a fleeting moment, hope lingered. Maybe she would breathe. Maybe she would open her eyes. But the longer the medics worked, the clearer it became. Jessica Radcliffe was gone. A silence heavier than any scream fell across the arena. In the water, Malow drifted motionless, his tall dorsal fin cutting through the surface like a blade. To untrained eyes, he appeared calm, almost serene. But for those who had witnessed the violence, that stillness was unbearable, as if the ocean itself were mocking them. Parents whispered reassurances, hurrying their children away. Some clutched stuffed Orca toys to their chests, their young faces twisted in confusion. The spectacle was over. Only the horror remained. Teenagers who had come for a summer thrill now stood pale, their hands shaking as phones captured the unthinkable. Clips of the attack were already shooting across the internet before the crowd even cleared the stands. What was marketed as family entertainment had in seconds transformed into a shared national trauma. Trainers shouted for calm as security guided people row by row toward the exits. It felt less like leaving a stadium and more like walking in a funeral procession. There was no closing announcement, no apology over the loudspeakers. Only the silent sight of a stretcher rolling past a white sheet draped over it, heavy with salt water. For the first time in its history, Ocean Haven stood still. No music, no orchestrated splashes, no rehearsed applause. Only the mechanical hum of the filtration pumps and the low murmur of disbelief spreading through the crowd. But this silence was not closure. It was a beginning. Even as the stands emptied, questions formed like storm clouds. How could this have happened to Jessica Radcliffe? What did it mean for an industry built on her passion, and who, if anyone, would be held accountable? The silence that fell over Ocean Haven that afternoon carried a weight no siren or statement could fill. To understand why Jessica was there, why she trusted Malow, we have to return to her beginnings. Before the spotlight and the tanks, there was only a little girl standing at the edge of the Pacific Ocean. Jessica grew up outside Santa Cruz, California, where cliffs met crashing surf and seabirds carved patterns against the sky. For her, the ocean wasn't scenery, it was part of life. Her childhood home backed against the bluffs, and the sound of waves was as constant as breathing. Her father, a respected marine biologist, often took her on research trips. Jessica would sit wide-eyed on a small boat watching dolphins leap alongside the bow, their sleek bodies cutting through the water like arrows of silver light. One afternoon when Jessica was 7, her father pointed toward the horizon. A black dorsal fin sliced the surface, followed by the thunderous breach of a killer whale. For Jessica, the world stopped. While most children would have screamed or clapped, she simply stood still, breath locked in her chest, eyes fixed on the massive creature disappearing into the deep. That moment rewired her life. While her peers collected toys and baseball cards, Jessica filled sketchbooks with whales and dolphins. She memorized species names, learned to mimic their calls, and plastered her bedroom walls with maps of the ocean. Her parents recognized it early. This wasn't a hobby, it was a calling. By the time she reached high school, her dream had hardened into purpose. She didn't want to just watch these animals from behind glass. She wanted to work with them directly to learn their language and stand beside them. For Jessica, it wasn't ambition, it was destiny written in salt water. But the ocean whispers its lessons with a price, and the same passion that drew her toward the sea would one day bring her face to face with the moment that silenced Ocean Haven. Dreams she knew didn't arrive overnight. To reach the giants of the deep, she would have to start small. At 19, still grinding through her marine biology degree, Jessica applied for an internship at Ocean Haven Marine Park. It was no glamorous debut. Her first days weren't spent swimming with orcas. They were spent chopping frozen fish into buckets, scrubbing algae from concrete tanks, and hauling hoses across slick decks. To an outsider, it looked like grunt work. To Jessica, it was front-row access to the life she wanted. She stayed late after shifts, filling notebooks with observations. She studied every subtle gesture the trainers used, the timing of whistles, the feeding rhythms, even the silent spaces where trust replaced commands. Slowly, her persistence was noticed. Veteran trainers who once dismissed her as just another intern began to see her value. She didn't just complete tasks, she absorbed everything. When a dolphin balked at a command, Jessica calmly coaxed it into responding. When a restless sea lion resisted, she redirected its energy into play. Step by step, she was proving herself not with force, but with patience. By the time Jessica turned 21, she earned what every intern dreamed of: the role of apprentice orca trainer. Buckets of thawed fish gave way to a silver whistle hanging around her neck, the symbol of trust and authority. She never forgot the first moment she stepped onto the platform in uniform, not as a helper, but as the trainer the crowd cheered for. Yet with that promotion came a truth few spoke aloud. Ocean Haven was more than a marine park. It was a machine built on ticket sales, sponsorships, and flawless performances. The deeper Jessica climbed, the more she balanced two worlds. To her, this was about science, behavior, and communication. To the park, it was about lights, choreography, and applause. Jessica carried both. She saw her whistle not as a tool of control, but as a bridge. In her mind, she wasn't teaching animals tricks. She was speaking across species, proving that patience could unlock trust. That belief would soon be tested on the park's most dangerous stage, her partnership with Malow. Towering 22 feet in length and weighing close to 12,000 pounds, Malow was Ocean Haven's crown jewel. His black and white body sliced through the water like a living submarine, his tall dorsal fin rising like a sail. He filled stadium seats, sold t-shirts, and made Ocean Haven millions. But beneath the polished shows lurked a reputation. Every trainer knew Malow was volatile. Whispers ran through the staff halls about his sudden refusals, the violent slap of his tail against the tank walls, the unpredictable pauses mid-routine. Some trainers warned flatly, he's dangerous. Jessica saw it differently. While others raised their voices, she lowered hers. Where others saw defiance, she saw fatigue, irritation, or curiosity. She filled notebooks with observations, the way his movement slowed when tired, the angle of his head when curious, the sharp flick of his tail when restless. To Jessica, these weren't red flags. They were conversations. It worked. Slowly, Malow responded to her in ways he didn't with anyone else. He performed cues without bribery, stayed close when she knelt at the tank's edge, even surfaced as though listening when she spoke softly. She gave him a nickname, My Big Boy, reshaping his image from predator to companion. The audience adored it. Parents pointed down to their children, whispering, "Look how much he loves her." But every bond carries risk. The deeper Jessica's trust grew, the more she believed she could handle him where others failed. It wasn't arrogance, it was devotion. She convinced herself that love, patience, and routine had tamed a wild heart. Their shows became Ocean Haven's centerpiece, their silent exchanges invisible to the crowd, but rich with meaning. Together they seemed unstoppable, trainer and whale moving as if they shared one pulse. Yet under the waves, cracks spread. At first, the warning signs were small. During feedings, Malow lunged at buckets, drenching junior staff. Once he snapped at a trainer's hand, forcing them to leap back in panic. Whispers returned, he's restless. Soon the signs grew harder to dismiss. Malow began ignoring whistle cues he once obeyed. He drifted to the far side of the tank, unresponsive, or rammed the glass with such force that the stadium rang with sound. Jessica saw frustration. Others saw danger, and the gulf between those two visions was widening. Trainers had been filing reports for months documenting Malow's escalating behavior. One even went so far as to recommend removing him from live waterwork altogether. But Ocean Haven had other priorities. Summer meant packed stands, soaring ticket sales, and Malow's face plastered on posters and gift shop toys. He wasn't just an Orca, he was the park's brand. To sideline him would mean empty seats, so the reports were shelved, warnings ignored. Jessica wasn't blind. Her own logs noted the changes, restless during feeding, ignoring hand signals, tail slaps, striking harder and more often. Yet when colleagues voiced concern, she dismissed them. "He's just moody lately," she'd say. "He knows me. We're okay." For her trust was armor, but that trust also blinded her. Where others saw danger, she saw devotion. She believed their bond was proof that patience and love could tame instinct. But wildness doesn't vanish. It waits. And while Ocean Haven pushed bigger, louder summer shows, Malow's lunges, tail slaps, and silences were reminders that instinct can't be choreographed away. The question wasn't if he would break that trust. It was when. July 6, 2011, a cloudless California afternoon. Families poured into Ocean Haven Stadium, more than 2,000 guests clutching sodas, nachos, and stuffed Orca toys. The scent of buttered popcorn mingled with saltwater spray. For most, it was vacation magic. For Jessica, it was routine. She zipped her wetsuit, tied her ponytail, and stood backstage as music thundered. Malow had been unusually cooperative all week, following cues without hesitation. A cautious optimism spread among the staff. Maybe, just maybe, the bond was holding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jessica Radcliffe and our star Malow." The announcer's voice boomed. Applause roared. Jessica stepped onto the platform, her smile sharp under the afternoon sun. Malow surfaced beside her, his dorsal fin slicing the pool like a blade. The routine began, spins, breaches, synchronized splashes. Every cue hit flawlessly. The crowd erupted, children laughed, cameras flashed. Then came the finale. Jessica dove cleanly into the pool arms, cutting through the water. Malow circled wide, the illusion of harmony at its peak. For a moment, it was perfect. Then everything changed. Malow stopped. His 22-foot body pivoted in a sudden burst of power. Jaws opened and clamped down across Jessica's torso. The sound of impact, dull, brutal, carried across the stadium. Gasps broke into screams. Parents shielded their children's faces, but many were too slow. Jessica vanished beneath the surface, the water exploding into white foam. Trainers blew whistles, hurled fists shouted commands. Malow ignored them all. He wasn't performing, he was holding on. Seconds stretched into eternity as the crowd watched frozen, the illusion of trust disintegrating before their eyes. This wasn't spectacle, it was instinct. And in one heartbeat, Ocean Haven's brightest show had become its darkest. Within hours, the park shut its gates. Media vans crowded the entrance, circling like vultures. Ocean Haven issued a short statement, a tragic accident. But those who had been there knew different. Parents described pulling their children close, hearing their screams echo long after they left. One father told reporters, "I can still hear her name being shouted in the crowd. I can still see the water turn red." A teenager posted that Jessica had inspired her to study marine biology, ending with, "Now I don't know if I can still do it." A young boy, his voice trembling through tears, told cameras, "I just remember her smile." And then she was gone. Jessica Radcliffe's family gathered on the California coast where her childhood had been shaped by salt air and crashing waves. In a small, quiet ceremony, her ashes were scattered into the Pacific, the same ocean she had loved more than life itself. For her family, grief was inseparable from a demand for answers. And soon that demand spread far beyond them. Protesters appeared outside Ocean Haven's gates, holding candles at night and signs by day. Justice for Jessica. Free Malow. Former trainers stepped forward with damning accounts, incident reports, hidden safety warnings, ignored memos shelved because revenue mattered more than risk. The narrative shifted almost overnight. Jessica's death was no longer seen as an isolated accident. It became the breaking point of an industry built on denial. 6 months later, Ocean Haven closed its doors permanently. The tanks were drained and the stadium seats abandoned. Malow was transported to a semi-wild sanctuary in the Pacific Northwest, a bay where no crowds applauded and no trainer entered the water again. To some, his relocation was an act of mercy. To others, it was a punishment exile from the empire he had once carried on his back. Either way, the silence was absolute. But Jessica's story refused to vanish. Documentaries dissected it. Lawsuits cited it. University classrooms debated it. For the first time, the applause that had filled those stadiums was drowned out by a harder truth: wildness cannot be choreographed. And once instinct breaks through, no training can contain it. The reckoning stretched beyond Ocean Haven. It reached into living rooms, classrooms, and legislative halls. And the question still hangs: do we as humans have the right to cage the ocean for entertainment? And if the cost of that choice is measured in human lives, who bears the blame? If you've stayed with Jessica's story until the end, the question is yours now. What do we celebrate and what do we ignore because the ocean never forgets?